I think they failed, Putin and Trump, because the idea was that as soon as Trump announces that American assistance is stopped, everybody would become, will start to panic, and Europe would start to force Ukraine to agree with Trump's plan or Putin's plan. But this didn't happen. I think this didn't happen. Europe basically realized, I think, what the plan is. Europe understands that Putin is not going to stop in Ukraine. I think this is understood in Britain, this is understood in France, and this is understood in Germany, and this is definitely understood in countries like Poland and the Baltic states and in Finland. So Europe has no choice. Europe has to have Ukraine to win this war.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Reports. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're joined by the Russian-American historian and journalist Dr Yuri Felshtinsky. Dr Felshtinsky is a professor at Boston University and the author of Blowing Up Russia, Terror from Within, which he wrote with the late Alexander Litvinenko. And his latest book is called Blowing Up Ukraine, The Return of Russian Terror. Dr Felshtinsky, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
In the events we've seen in the past couple of weeks, are we witnessing the decoupling of Europe from America? And what does that mean for the Kremlin?
Yes, of course. And I believe there are two main reasons for this. First, Trump took an obligation to force Ukraine to capitulate. That was promised to Putin. We could speculate and raise questions why, but that's precisely what Trump was promising to do, to stop any assistance to Ukraine and to force it to capitulate. And now he calls it the peaceful plan, but this plan actually does not belong to Trump. It was announced by Putin in June 24, and it was publicized. Basically, this is not a plan about a peace. This is a plan to force surrender of Ukraine to Putin. Trump is doing this for two reasons. And the second one is actually, I believe, is even more important than the first one. So the first one is to deliver Ukraine to Putin, which was promised to Putin. But there is more important reason. The reason is the following. Trump is actually provoking Putin to take Ukraine first and to start confrontation or even the war with Europe. And by doing this, Trump is achieving his major goal. He is making America great again, because the greatness of the United States could be created through destruction of Europe. So what we see is that Trump is actually fighting against Canada, which is a major democracy in Northern America. Trump is fighting against Europe. We see there are going to be tariffs in Europe as well. I think for all practical reasons, NATO doesn't exist anymore. Otherwise, President Macron would not talk about French nuclear umbrella if there is an American one, but I think it doesn't exist. I think this is over. And again, Trump's idea is to provoke Putin to invade Europe. And then the United States would be great again, as it happened twice in history before, during the First World War and during the Second World War. That's what I think we is facing. So for Trump, Putin is a great assistant to destroy Europe and democracy and Europe. And for Putin, of course, Trump is a person who is going to deliver to him Ukraine and allow him to invade Europe. That's what I think we are risking to see.
And how would you characterize this relationship between Trump and Putin? I mean, is this just is Trump just trying to get Putin to the table? Does he just want to normalize relations? Or is there a kind of recognition between these two leaders of how they see the world?
Well, Trump and Putin have very strange personal relations. We noticed this at least since 2016, when Trump started to talk about his, political programs for his first terms. And there are a lot of suspicions and speculations. There is definitely a financial link. Trump was using Russian money, a lot of it. Maybe we are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. This time, financially, this is not an important issue because Trump has more important people like Elon Musk, who are much richer than all those Russian oligarchs or Putin himself. But first, Trump believes that the entire world should be divided and decided by three people: Trump himself, Putin, and Xi, and the rest actually do not have the right to voice their opinion and have opinion. Secondly, again, for Trump, Putin is very important friend who is going to destroy democracy in Europe. And democracy in Europe, of course, is important to be, should be destroyed, because then by this you are also weakening democracy in the United States, or liberal democracy, you may call it. But indeed, we are witnessing a rise of, we could call it fascism, the Italian kind of fascism, right, which Mussolini created and developed in Italy. That's what we see, and in order for this, whatever, right-wing, conservative, fascist national parties to win in Europe, you need, number one, to create chaos, and you do this through basically dissolving NATO, and you do it through dissolvement or destruction of European Union. We will see it. We will see that both Russia and Donald Trump, with Musk's money, would start to finance nationalist movements in Europe, with the hope that those parties will win through local elections and withdraw from European Union. And if this happens, Europe would lose not only military alliance, which is NATO, right? But and again, from my point of view, it's already gone. No one announces this officially, but it doesn't. You cannot rely on it anymore. And economically, you break unification of Europe through dissolution of European Union, and then Putin would start to take country after country. But the most important part is Ukraine, because Putin is not able to move further unless he has Ukraine. And that's why it's important for Trump to ruin Ukraine as much as possible. And that's why we see every day, another step in Trump's assistance to Putin to destroy Ukraine. He stopped military assistance. He stopped, he doesn't allow intelligence services to assist Ukraine anymore. He's changing, internal American legal rules about refugee status for 240,000 Ukrainians, etc., etc., etc. Like every time he's creating something new to have more and more and more pressure on Ukraine to force it capitulate.
And is this confluence of objectives between Russia and America, I mean, is this a traditional alliance as we might see it, or is it something more worrying that their aims politically simply align, Putin and Trump?
Well, there is nothing traditional in what Trump is doing. It's very untraditional. Traditional of the United States, let's call it skepticism, was very skeptical about both the Soviet Union and even Russia. It's even more ironic that the Republican Party was much skeptical towards Russia and the Soviet Union. If you compare it with the position of Democrats. But now what's happening in the United States is actually a counter-revolution, we should say. Now Putin is supported by Trump, and Trump is supported by Putin because they have common enemy. And this enemy is world democracy. And that's again why he is taking, I'm sure he will take all tariffs, sanctions to be abolished in relation to Russia, in relation to Belarus, and he is introducing sanctions actually against democratic countries, because when you introduce 25% increase in tariffs against Canada, and talking about 250% tariffs against some of Canadian products, these are not tariffs, these are sanctions. And he's punishing Canada for the refusal to become, we could laugh, but he's punishing them for their refusal to become the 51st state of the United States. Now, for those who didn't look at the map for a long time, just to remind that these are countries equal in territory, not in population, but in territory they are. So, and he's also punishing Europe, and he will punish Europe. And but again, the idea is that together with Putin, they will destroy European democracy, and through this will allow, basically fascism to rise again. And it's not by chance you see people like Elon Musk and Stephen Bannon publicly giving Hitler salutes, publicly without any, without being not afraid to be without afraid to be criticized for this, because they feel that with Trump it's their time now, and this is probably their only chance to win, and they're going to use this opportunity.
Well, we discussed Ukraine a bit there, and I do want to zoom in on some of the recent developments about the negotiations. Ukraine and American teams are in Riyadh. What developments on these talks that are going on in Saudi Arabia will the Kremlin be watching for?
Well, honestly, I do not believe in any agreements between Ukraine and the United States at this point. I do not think that anything is going to be signed for very simple reason. They have completely different goals, and Ukraine basically wants to survive this war and to keep its independence. And Trump has obligation towards Putin to destroy Ukraine's independence. And so these positions are so far away that there is nothing what could be signed. I think all those negotiations are conducted. Well, they conducted because traditionally you should conduct negotiations. They're conducted because from diplomatic point of view, it's more advantage for both sides to create an impression that there is still a dialogue, but there is no dialogue. Nothing is going to be signed, and Ukraine does not have actually room for cooperation with Trump, because again he's demanding capitulation of country. He wants the Ukraine to commit suicide because at this point the so-called peaceful plan, and again this is the plan which was produced in Moscow, and it was published by Putin in June 24. That number one, Ukraine allows Russia to keep all occupied territories. Number two, it gives Russia additional territories which are not even occupied at this point. Number three, Zelensky has to resign. Number four, the army should be demobilized. And number five, Ukraine would promise not to join NATO or any military alliance. And if you think about this plan, you understand that this is not a peaceful plan. This is a plan to maybe to stop fighting for a short period of time, what would allow Russia to regroup and to attack again. And we have to remember that this is the second attempt now for Russia to take Ukraine. The first attempt was made in 2014. So unless, and you see, we could accept some points of this so-called peace plan. The hostility might stop. Ukraine could accept the fact that it lost some territories. Zelensky might resign. But when you demand Ukraine to demobilize the army and promise not to join any military alliance, then you understand that this is not the plan for peace. This is a plan which allows Russia to invade again. If this plan would include the point that Ukraine is joining NATO, then we could call it peace plan and think that probably, who knows, Ukraine would live in a format which existed for West and East Germany for some years, and there was peace in Europe, but it was secured by membership of West Germany in NATO. So that's why this is not the peace plan. This is a plan for capitulation. So I do not believe that this would succeed, because Ukraine would not commit suicide. And I think that Europe has no choice at this point, because if Ukraine is taken, Putin would proceed to Europe. He will take Moldova first. He will advance into the Baltic states. Then probably Finland and Poland could not stay, let's call it, neutral if the Baltic states are invaded. So I think this is the road to the Third World War, and that's why Trump was mentioning, by the way, the Third World War twice during his meeting with Zelensky. But he should relate this, of course, he should address this not to Zelensky but to Putin. But indeed, if Ukraine is taken, then Europe is in war. So the only way, the cheapest way, the safest way for Europe to avoid the classical European war, which would become the Third World War, is of course not to allow Ukraine to be taken. And for this, I think Europe should try to arrange assistance to Ukraine as quickly as possible and to replace the American assistance, which is lost for the next 4 years at least.
And interestingly, though, in amongst this, Trump still seems to back the idea of European peacekeepers, as he calls them, going into Ukraine to stop any further advances by the Russians or to prevent any further conflict. Russia have said they wouldn't accept that. I mean, surely this would be against Putin's whole reasoning for invading Ukraine if NATO troops be they European or American, end up in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, Trump basically stated that Americans are not going to participate at all. Well, 2 days ago or yesterday, we have time difference with Europe. He announced that Americans are not going to participate in any military joint exercises in Europe anymore. So again, I expect him to announce that the United States are withdrawing from NATO, but I think he is waiting with this decision because, as he mentioned, to Zelensky, and he loves to use the comparison with card game. He is holding this Trump, this Trump card in his pocket. He will release it sooner or later. But you know, peacekeeping forces could be sent to Europe, but the idea of peacekeepers usually to hold peace, and since there is no peace, I think it's too early to talk about peacekeepers. I think what's important is to try to end this war. I do not believe this is possible because actually it's prerogative of Putin to stop the war, because he was the person who started this war in 22, and I do not see any indications that he is planning to do this. Indeed, if we notice, we have this major discussion, right, between Washington D.C. and Trump and Europe and Ukraine, and Putin is basically silent, and he's silent because he doesn't need to talk. Trump is doing all talking, and the plan which Trump is introducing, it's Putin's plan. So there is nothing what Putin could add to this Trump's initiative, right? So that's why he is silent. But Russia is not interested to stop the war. Russia is interested in taking Ukraine, but what's important to understand that Russia actually, from the military point of view, Russia failed. They tried to take Ukraine in 2014. They could not. They have to stop in 2015 and wait for some years. They tried to take Ukraine in a kind of blitzkrieg in 22 when Russian troops moved into direction of Kiev from Belarus, and they failed. And for 3 years now, they actually, I mean, they are progressing in terms of taking control of territories, but the speed is so slow, and they are losing so many people that militarily they are not able to take Ukraine. That's why they are trying to take it with the help of Trump through capitulation of Ukraine. But if capitulation would not take place, if Ukraine would not agree to surrender, then I think Putin has actually, as Trump will say, no cards in his pockets anymore. I mean, that's all he could do. He cannot win this war from the military point of view. He could continue to ruin Ukraine with a certain speed, but again, the speed is very, very slow. His only hope, and his last hope, is to use Trump to force Ukraine to capitulate. I think he failed. I think they failed, Putin and Trump, because the idea was that as soon as Trump announces that American assistance is stopped, everybody would become, will start to panic, and Europe would start to force Ukraine to agree with Trump's plan or Putin's plan. But this didn't happen. I think this didn't happen. Europe basically realized, I think, what the plan is. Europe understands that Putin is not going to stop in Ukraine. I think this is understood in Britain, this is understood in France, and this is understood in Germany, and this is definitely understood in countries like Poland and the Baltic states and in Finland. So Europe has no choice. Europe has to have Ukraine to win this war.
And can Europe, without US support, provide a deterrent to Russia? Does Putin care about Europe if there is no US backstop?
Well, economically speaking, Europe is much stronger than Russia. In terms of population, Europe is much bigger than Russia. So we do understand, of course, that Russia is ready to send, people to die, and Russia is ready to kill, and Europe prefer not to do this. But it's not that Europe is not strong enough. It's a political decision and it's an understanding of the problem. I think the major problem which we had for the last 3 years, when both Biden administration and Europe was hoping that somehow this war will die itself. The approach basically was that you help Ukraine, but you give them as much weapons as they would need, to hold the front. But the idea was that Ukraine should not win this war and Russia should not lose this war. For two reasons. One, because Russia is a nuclear power, and who knows, maybe if they are losing this war, they would escalate this war into nuclear. And second, well, actually, Russia is a weak country, and if it's going to be ruined the way it was ruined in 91, and instead of Russia we will have several states, then we will have several problems instead of one problem. I think that if the first point about nuclear confrontation, has certain weight, the second one, of course, is not. But that's why for 3 years Ukraine was not getting what it's needed. And what is more important, Ukraine actually was not allowed to use Western weapons for the strikes against Russian territory. Ukraine had the right to use these weapons only for the strike against Ukrainian occupied territories, but not against the Russian Federation. It's only at the very end of the Biden administration, finally the permission was given to strike against the Russian Federation territory, right? But but this was too late, of course, and I think that's what important. What is important for Europe to give Ukraine everything Ukraine needs. Ukrainian army, by the way, from military point of view, is doing absolutely great. Absolutely great. No one actually expected this from Ukrainians. They're holding this aggression for 3 years and they're doing great. But they need equipment and they need permission to do what they want to do. I think if this is given, the situation will be changed very quickly for better for Ukrainians.
And just finally, as we've only got a short time left now, it does currently seem that Putin will walk away from Ukraine with more territory than he started this new invasion with. He has managed to keep his regime in power despite threats, during this conflict. And as you say, the US-Europe alliance appears to be in quite significant risk. Has Putin won in this conflict? Has he achieved at least some of his strategic aims after this war?
Well, he was planning, as we know from Putin's statements, there were a lot of them, to recreate basically a new kind of the Soviet Union, what would include not only former Soviet republics like the Baltic states, like Ukraine, but who would also, return the influence which the Soviet Union had in Europe. He basically wanted NATO to be dissolved. He did not want those countries like Poland and the Baltic states, of course, and all others to join NATO. So basically, he wanted to have the old order. Does this mean that he would proceed even further? We would never know. From this point of view, he didn't win because again the expectation was that by now he will have Ukraine, Moldova, the Baltic states, influence of the old Soviet Union. This didn't happen, and this didn't happen because of Ukraine. So for Ukraine, for Putin, it's extremely important to destroy Ukraine. Otherwise, he's not able to proceed, not only to Europe, but even to countries like Moldova, which are very weak and kind of close to Russia. So I do not think this is a win for Putin, but he's a survivor. As we see, he survived these 3 years, which were very complicated for him. And probably the next 4 years are going to be much easier. But this doesn't mean that if Ukraine continues to receive assistance, he would be able to take Ukraine. And again, if he is not able to take Ukraine, he is not able to proceed into Europe.
Yuri Felshtinsky, author of Blowing Up Ukraine, The Return of Russian Terror. Many thanks for joining us today on the Trump Report.
Thank you very much for your time.